So he's really telling us that it is not about how learned we are, though that may be impressive to people, though that may allow us to, get the whole room's attention. But is that what we want? Do we want attention? Do we want notoriety for what we've learned in the books? Or do we want to be spoken about in the rooms that we're not in about what good people we are? That's the difference Seneca is pointing out to us. Do you want attention when you're in the room, or do you want to be spoken of well even when you're not in the room? Right? And in the end of our lives, when we are on our deathbeds, and when it doesn't matter how much wealth we accumulated, or how much we knew, or how much attention or fame we had, or how big our acres were, and we're worrying about the relationships and the friendships and the intimacies and the good deeds that we did for others and the sharing of ourselves, that is what we are going to be concerned with. Did we live a quote unquote good life? Now, in this next paragraph, he's very funny to me because he really points out how this can kind of devolve, how the pursuit of just knowledge for knowledge's sake, but not in the way that Newman talks about it, right? But here in the sense of just trying to know things just to say, I know things, right? Not for wisdom's sake, but just for the accumulation of facts. How devolving this can get. So let's look at some examples he takes here because it's very funny to me. And I love his tone here. And he makes a very good point. He says, I've been speaking about liberal studies, yet look at the amount of useless and superfluous, right? Superfluous, add that to your dictionary. It means more than needed. Matter to be found in the philosophers. Even they have descended, devolved to the level of drawing distinctions between the uses of different syllables and discussing the proper meanings of prepositions and conjunctions, right? That reference I made, let's talk about the evolution of the use of a or e or I in this one word over a period of 1,000 years, right? What's the point? It's the same word, right? It's the same connotation. They have come to envy the philologist and the mathematician. They have taken over all the inessential elements. Look at the words: superfluous, inessential, not necessary, useless. Okay? This is what he's talking about. There is knowledge out there that is not going to feed you. Okay. And we have a short time on this earth, and we don't have limitless brains, right? So we should be taking the opposite of this: useful, necessary, essential elements, right? But here he's referring to the opposite. And he says they've taken over all the essential elements in those studies, with the result that they know more about devoting care and attention to their speech, their propaganda, their rhetoric, than about devoting such attention to their lives, their souls, their reason, their real work here. And here he's going to give some examples. Listen and let me show you the sorry consequences, the sad consequences to which subtlety carried too far can lead, and what an enemy it is to truth. And this is the important thing that he's declaring here. This is not for nothing that he's saying this. He says that when we carry subtlety, when we make so many distinctions, when we carry that so far, that it becomes more important than truth. It becomes more important to us than the big picture of what we should be focusing on. It becomes an enemy to truth. And if you want some other synonyms for truth, let's talk about freedom, right? Let's talk about wisdom, right? It becomes an enemy to freedom. It becomes an enemy to truth. It becomes an enemy to life. Okay. And we're talking about rhetoric, propaganda, useless information. And here he gives some examples of philosophers. Protagoras, for example, declares that it is possible to argue either side of any question with equal force, even the question whether or not one can equally argue either side of a question. All right. So let's think about that. Protagoras is saying, just like a lawyer, that any question can be argued for and against, that any lawyer, any arguer can say for and against any kind of argument, even that sentence alone, that I can argue for or against my sentence. Okay, so what's the point of that, right? Nosophanes declares that of the things which appear to us to exist, nothing exists any more than it does exist. So let me tell you an example of that, right? Of the things that appears to exist, let's say the room. Okay, the room appears to exist to me. Well, Nosophanes says that it actually doesn't exist any more than it does exist. I cannot be sure of its existence. I cannot be sure that the room exists any more than I can be sure that the room does not exist. Okay. Well, how does that help me in my life? It's interesting. It's kind of cool and fun to think about that. I mean, we could twist our minds around that for a good 30 minutes, but what's the point of that? Right? Parmenides declares that of all these phenomena, nothing exists except the whole. Right? So Parmenides is saying if I'm in the room, nothing in the room exists except the whole room and all of its parts as a whole. Okay, interesting. So the toaster doesn't exist, the lamp doesn't exist any more than the whole part of the room exists. Again, kind of cool, kind of a funky idea. I could twist my mind around that for 30 minutes, but what's the point of that? Zeno of Elea has dismissed all difficulties by saying something else, that nothing exists, right? That my idea of being in the room is not even sure. I can't be sure that the room exists. I can't be sure that I exist in the room. Again, very cool, funky idea, but what is that going to help me in my life? Right? Besides create anxiety in me, that all of this uncertainty of what is existing, what is not existing, what can I be sure of existence, what can I be sure is not existing. And the Pyrrhonian, the Megarian, the Etrurian, and the academic schools pursue more or less similar lines. The last named and introduced a new branch of knowledge, non-knowledge, right? That instead of pursuing knowledge, I should pursue to know nothing. Again, interesting ideas. We can sit around a table and just talk about that, but that time talking around the table is really not going to help us anyway in our quote unquote real work in this life. And so he comes back and he says, all of these theories you should just toss on top of the heap of superfluous liberal studies. The people I first mentioned provide me with knowledge of which is not going to be any use to me. And the others snatch away from me any hope that I can even get knowledge at all. They're creating anxiety in me. They're creating doubt in me. Is it interesting? Yes. Is it curious to me? Would I like to think about it? Absolutely. Because the mind and then the way that we are as a species on this planet, remember, our mind is so different from every other species on this planet. It has created bridges and civilizations and technology and shuttles into space and planes that fly and boats that float. We are amazing. Okay. And our mind is made for useful things and for useless things. But we have to be careful to protect our mind. Superfluous knowledge would be preferable to no knowledge. I would like to know more than I should know rather than know not enough. One side offers me no guiding light to direct my vision towards any actual truth because it's twisting me around these nonsense ideas, while the other side just wants to make me blind and see nothing. If I believe Protagoras, then there's nothing certain in the universe. If I believe Nosophanes, then there's just one thing that's certain, that I can be certain of nothing. If Parmenides, then only one thing exists, the whole. And if Zeno, then not even the whole exists. So then what are we? The things that surround us, the things upon which we live, the basic tenets of truth, of society, of establishment, of living, what are they? Our whole universe is no more than a semblance of reality. I talked to you about words last class. Our reality is built of the language that we create. Perhaps a deceptive semblance. We can create lies and create an illusion of reality. Perhaps one with no substance. Perhaps one with no real building blocks of truth. I should find it difficult to say which of these people annoy me the most. Those who would have us know nothing, or the ones that refuse even to leave us with the small satisfaction of knowing that we know nothing. And he points right back to Socrates, which says, or who says rather, I know only that I know nothing. The more I know, the more I know nothing. And what does Socrates mean when he says that? He says, the more I learn about the world, the more I learn about the human, the more I learn about nature and the universe and wisdom, the more I realize I know very little about all of these things. I actually know so little about these things that I could compare it more to nothing than I can compare it to everything. Right? As you grow older and as you grow wiser, you will become more humble. You will not become more boastful or proud because you know so much. You will become more humble and less full of pride because you will realize there is so much yet to learn. There is so much yet that you do not know, and that will humble you in understanding other perspectives, in listening to other stories, in seeing things without clouded vision, without blinders on, without such attachment. Like Plato says, those slaves in the cave who are attached and enslaved to ideas that they were raised in, you will be free. And when I talk about knowledge being free, wait till we get to Douglas and Malcolm X. You will be free to see that the human, in the scope of our time on this planet, it is a very little time to be alive 100 years on this planet if we are given that much, to know anything about the universe, to know anything about our real purpose, and to waste our time on gossip, on nonsense, on the things that don't matter is truly a waste of our time on this earth.